Welcome to the ASGCT annual meeting in Boston. This week we are talking with some of our ASGCT members to learn about their backgrounds and talk about ASGCT membership. My name is Ben McLeod from over at Convey Bio, and I'm here today with Dylan Bechtle from Johnson & Johnson. Dylan, can you give us a quick intro to your role and the work you're focused on right now?
Yeah, so thanks so much for having me on, and it's been a really great time here at ASGCT so far. A lot of wonderful presentations, and really excited to be on the show. So yeah, my name is Dylan Bechtle, and I work within Johnson & Johnson's regulatory policy group. I'm a molecular biologist and attorney by training, which I think feeds really nicely into some of the regulatory policy work I do both internally and externally at organizations like ASGCT. So my major focus in my job is around cell and gene therapy, both across our marketed products and those within the pipeline. And my role is really to help our organization anticipate regulatory policy shifts, interpret what they mean for our programs, and then something I really like about my role is how collaborative it is externally, where I get to partner at organizations like ASGCT or other advocacy forums to pull together proposals and feedback for evolving regulatory frameworks. So right now, some of my focus areas are on promoting frameworks that allow the use of prior knowledge to streamline development and regulatory review. And really this is so the field can reduce duplicative testing and get to the clinic or approval faster. I know that's something that is kind of a unifying theme across many of the talks we've heard so far here this week, is how can we streamline, say, first-in-human preclinical data packages, IND-enabling data packages, and then on the flip side, how can we leverage a lot of the expertise that we've built, say, in CMC or in the clinic, where maybe there are conserved products or conserved modalities. How can we leverage that prior knowledge? And we've seen a lot of good movement from FDA. We're anticipating draft guidance from FDA, and that's been a major focus of my work at ASGCT on the Reg Affairs Committee. You know, outside of that, I'm also looking at harmonization efforts, things like ICH, to ensure that, you know, not only does the US develop a fit-for-purpose regulatory framework, but the requirements that we see outside the US are relatively harmonized. So that's something I'm really excited about, and there's a great output from the Cell and Gene Therapy discussion group that's kind of guided my work there. And then one other plug, just for a recent publication I had, has been around long-term follow-up, and specifically long-term follow-up in the CAR-T space, where a consortia of sponsors, academics, patient advocates came together and looked at the current regulatory framework for long-term follow-up, and through some sort of combined safety analysis and really just an evaluation of the current requirements and barriers that the current requirements pose to, say, patients and healthcare providers, proposed a number of efficiencies for long-term follow-up, and that's something I'm really excited about. So would encourage everyone to check out the publication in last month's Journal for Immunotherapy of Cancer on CAR-T long-term follow-up. So yeah, in brief, I touch on a number of different policy topics within cell and gene therapy, but it's all kind of unified around the idea of creating fit-for-purpose and risk-based frameworks for developing cell and gene therapy.
Fantastic. So what first got you into cell and gene therapy? There are so many different ways by which people enter this space. I originally wanted to be an optometrist and then realized I was too dumb to get into optometry school. How did you get into this space?
Yeah, so I think like most members I've talked to, it was kind of serendipitous. And I was fortunate enough as an undergrad at UC Berkeley, go Bears, I was studying under a number of pioneers in the field of genome editing. And, from my 18, 19-year-old perspective, I thought, wow, this is really going to be the future. And I was just enamored from day one, hearing my professors, at the time of characterizing some of the early CRISPR editing modalities and other editing mechanisms, just talk about the transformational benefit that cell and gene therapy could have for patients. Not only was it from like a toolkit perspective. As a molecular biologist, you're always looking for better ways in the lab to in this case, alter the genomes of the cells that you're studying, but then translating that into a therapeutic benefit, a one-time treatment for patients who oftentimes are living with serious chronic diseases with unmet need. Really just seeing that benefit from an early stage drove me to want to build my career around cell and gene therapy.
Excellent. Yeah, you benefited maybe a little bit more from the get-go of being able to get into the field. It took me a while to figure it out, so that's awesome. So what part of the space would you say has you most excited right now?
Yeah, so I would say, it's both a challenge and an opportunity right now in the space is around scaling and obviously I work very closely around some CAR T products, and I'm really excited about some of the emerging approaches we're seeing in CAR T, specifically things like in vivo CAR T, or even some of the alternative approaches beyond just CAR T. Yesterday I was sitting in on a conversation on CAR macrophages and other sorts of modalities. I really like the idea of building upon what we've learned in CAR T. And with something like in vivo CAR T, it really has the potential benefits of autologous CAR T while reducing the bespoke and multi-step nature of manufacturing individualized therapies. So conceptually, these approaches have the potential to simplify CMC and the patient journey and shorten the time to treat patients, reducing the need for bridging therapies, and really expand treatment beyond specialized centers that a lot of the current CAR Ts are mainly operating in. So really this comes down to access and efficiency, and those are really some pillars that I try to embody in my work in regulatory policy. And once again, kind of going back to building on what we've already established in the field, I'm hoping that we can leverage some of the prior knowledge that's already been established around CAR T as we look to some of these new frontiers and make sure that the regulatory pathways for developing products are fit for purpose and risk-based and build upon what we already know.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that, right? Just one of the challenges right now is, for the most part, it's not like you can just go to any hospital and get a CAR T infusion. You really do need a specialized center. There's not a whole lot of places that are manufacturing this, right? So, yeah, I definitely see that as an area going forward that's going to be interesting.
Yeah,
so
and if I could just quickly interject, yesterday there was a presentation I was watching, and it talked about, the uptake of cell and gene therapies in the U.S., and, it's not like we're seeing a plateau, but I really think that there's, a significant number of patients who could benefit from cell and gene therapy who potentially aren't able to access it in the U.S. or outside the U.S. So I think as the field and as, regulators and folks in regulatory affairs, we need to look for ways to promote development that can really help address some of these access gaps, whether that's life cycle management for CMC or ensuring that we can scale up effectively. So just want to double down on that point.
Excellent, for sure. All right, so what challenge or opportunity in the field do you think deserves a bit more attention?
Yeah, so I think piggybacking on the last question, it's really around scale. So I think we can look at it from a number of approaches. I've already talked about some of the emerging modalities that might help address the individualized nature of manufacturing current cell and gene therapies. But I think even when we look at autologous CAR Ts and other sorts of more established modalities, there's still a lot of opportunity for improvement. So, I think we should look towards CMC lifecycle management and ensuring that sponsors can scale up and scale out, and either promote more streamlined manufacturing processes through things like automation or standardization, and then simultaneous with that are the regulatory frameworks that allow for that post-approval change and CMC lifecycle management. So I think this becomes really critical, not only as CAR T and other established modalities go into earlier line settings, but there's been a lot of conversations here at ASGCT around CAR T and more common or chronic indications such as autoimmunity, and where the patient population in some of these indications really would be disproportionate to the amount of scale we can produce. The onus is on the field to figure out how we can ensure we meet this demand, and a lot of that comes down to CMC lifecycle management.
Makes sense. All right, well, Dylan, we are here in the ASGCT podcast booth on the floor, so we would be remiss not to ask, how has ASGCT membership helped you in your career?
Yeah, so I'm not being biased just because I'm sitting here on the ASGCT floor, but I think ASGCT has helped my career tremendously. One of the things that I think myself and others in the field struggle with is just how quickly the technology advances and how much there is to learn. And at least from a learning and development perspective, ASGCT is the 1 week a year that I always look forward to, where I know I'm going to learn and hear the latest and greatest from academics. And really, as folks in industry, it behooves us to stay connected with the frontier of research, because in a couple of years' time, we'll start to see those sorts of technologies, in preclinical or early clinical studies. So really, keeping my finger on the pulse is one huge benefit of ASGCT membership. And just a quick plug for folks who maybe aren't involved with ASGCT or are just beginning their journey at ASGCT, there are a number of really helpful resources like reports, journal articles that I try to stay up to date with, and I just find it to be a really good way to see where the field is headed and catch up to speed and tap into the community. And this really brings me to my second point. I think ASGCT is a true community. Another thing I really enjoy about coming to these meetings or through my work on the U.S. Reg Affairs Committee. So I think everyone here at ASGCT is united by a common goal of bringing life-saving therapies to patients, and I think that's really important when the science and technology is moving so fast that there's a convening forum to keep us all aligned.
Yeah. This was the second ever conference I went to once I entered industry, and I've just loved it ever since. So this is version number 5 I've been to now. A couple years ago I got a job offer at this event. It's been hugely valuable to me as well. So last question here, why has ASGCT continued to be valuable to you as a member?
Yeah, so I think ASGCT, the way I view it, it's really a big tent organization, and I say this from the perspective of someone who works for a pretty large pharma company, and I'm involved on ASGCT's Reg Affairs Committee, and across that committee you have folks from the smallest of biotechs, academic researchers, to individuals like myself who work for large pharmaceutical companies. And I think we're all united by ensuring that the regulatory frameworks around these technologies evolve in a fit-for-purpose and risk-based manner. But at the same time, having that breadth of membership experience really ensures that the proposals that we put forward, either to FDA or other sorts of health authorities, those sorts of proposals reflect the entire community of cell and gene therapy developers, rather than just a subset of, say, academic developers or a subset of small biotechs or a subset of large pharmaceutical developers. So I think that breadth and diversity of membership really helps lend credence to the work that we produce at the Reg Affairs Committee and all the other great work that goes on here at ASGCT.
Fantastic. Dylan, thank you so much for your time. Enjoy the rest of the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on.